Hello, and welcome back to Full Time, presented by Amazon Prime. I am Tamerra Griffin, and this week we're talking rivalries. You know how sometimes people ask that philosophical question that always goes viral on social media, like, what is a sandwich? And people are like, is it a hot dog? Is a burrito a sandwich? That's sort of what we're digging into right now, because in the NWSL over the last 12 years, we've seen some true, real rivalries, but we've also seen some that raise a few eyebrows. So we're digging into the question of what is a rivalry in this league in the year 2025. And to do that, we're bringing in some friends of ours, seasoned journalists who have been covering this league deeply and thoughtfully over the years and have some really interesting thoughts about what composes a rivalry, a derby in this league. Of course, I can't do all of this on my own. I'm joined by my co-host, as always, Meg Linehan, and I believe congratulations are in order. If you're not watching on video, she has a sweet, undefeated national champions Vermont green hat. Meg, how are you doing? Are you recovering? Do you feel properly hydrated again? It was a long weekend for you.
I am properly hydrated again. I mean, just what a run. Like, undefeated season, and the final game of the year, the away game, I was on the bus down to Western Mass. Also, I mean, put a pin in this. You want to talk about a rivalry that's brewing.
I was wondering.
I will hit on that in a second in terms of like what that might actually look like in terms of what you could learn from it. But to go down 2-0 in a couple of games and come back, extra time, penalty kicks. The winning goal for Vermont Green was scored by the same kid that scored the winning goal for the University of Vermont in the NCAA championship 8 months ago. So Maxi Kissel is now like a legend of Vermont forever. Just like truly what a great, like 5,000 people, the stadium only fits 2,500. People were like
sitting on laps,
on everything that they possibly could. Yeah. Every surface available, just like a truly magical night in every way. But I do think like talking about rivalries from what I have seen this season, because there was already this existing rivalry from a team in New Hampshire, Seacoast, but Western Mass being on that away bus, being in that stadium, legitimately kind of being harassed by these 8-year-old kids the entire game, where sometimes they had really good chance of like, get the bus going as we're down 2-0 as the clock ticks over to 90, but also lapsing into homophobic chanting at but there is this element of real hatred, right? Of like hating being in that environment, respecting it like very begrudgingly, but at the end of the day, hating it. And then the pure satisfaction of, Zach Zenge, Owen O'Malley scoring 2 goals, winning the winning the division title away, them shutting the lights off on the team on the field as they're celebrating. Like, that's rivalry stuff. And that's all happening very organically at this level. And so it is really interesting to have lived through a lot of it this summer with Vermont Green, and now getting into this conversation and having been out to multiple Cascadia rivalry games, having been at, we've got this kind of brewing East Coast rivalry game between Gotham and Spirit, and having been to a lot of Gotham and Spirit games over the years, and I don't know about it, right? So I think there's a lot of really interesting stuff to get into here, just especially as the league grows.
Totally. And I think the more I think about what a rivalry is, the more I can actually appreciate the complexity of it. I mean, we will have lots of deep conversation about this with Jenna, with Jason, with Susie. But there is like a really delicate balance between the respect and the hatred, between like you have to appreciate your enemy in order to like properly, it's sort of like how trash talk works.
You have to know your enemy in order to like go for
get
the
under
killing
their skin.
Blow. Yeah, totally.
Exactly. That's how trash talk works at its best, and that's how the lore is built. And you can't really have too much of a rivalry without lore. But before I get too deep into it, because the more I'm thinking about it, the more I get like really excited about the possibilities for more rivalries in this league. But yeah, long time coming. We are always talking sort of around this concept of rivalries in past episodes. Melanie Anzide, our colleague at The Athletic, has written a piece from earlier in this season about this brewing rivalry ? Between Gotham and Spirit that I recommend everyone read. And we're going to get into it. especially because we've got 3 of them coming up this weekend. But before we do that, make sure that you're following us everywhere you scroll, pretty much, at TA Fulltime, on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok. We're posting all kinds of original video content that you won't necessarily find on this very show. Make sure that you're subscribed to our free newsletter. And as always, you can reach out to us via email, fulltime@theathletic.com. Follow us at TA Fulltime. And in case you didn't know, the league has officially declared this weekend Rivalry Weekend. There are 3 matchups that they're trying to turn into a thing when it comes to derbies. We've got the East Coast Derby rivalry between Gotham FC and the Washington Spirit, the classic, traditional Cascadia Rivalry between Seattle Reign and the Portland Thorns, and the newest member to the rivalry club, the SoCal Derby between Angel City FC and the San Diego Wave. So that is sort of what prompted this discussion about what makes a rivalry. 3 very different matchups, different histories, different lore, different players who have sort of made them what they are. All of that we're going to get into. And it's important because I think rivalries are so quintessential to sports, right, Meg?
Totally. I mean, that is... I don't think we could have found 3 more different approaches to what is a rivalry. So I guess thanks unintentionally NWSL for giving us the perfect place to kick this discussion off from.
All right. We are so excited to be joined by Susie Rantz, writer for Sounder at Heart, who's been covering the Seattle Reign for as long as we can remember in terms of storytelling and journalism. In my opinion, Susie, you're just as legendary as the players. How are you doing? And thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, I'm doing great. I'm such a fan of the podcast, so thanks for having me on.
Susie, let's talk about an NWSL rivalry. And before, obviously, we brought you on to pick your brain about Cascadia, because that, I think to both of us, is like the NWSL rivalry, right? But to you, what makes an NWSL rivalry in the year of our Lord 2025?
Yeah, I love that rivalries have different origins. This one is because of location and proximity, and that's how it started, but that's not always how an NWSL rivalry starts. I think there obviously has to be some bad blood for some reason in the rivalry. I think obviously the fans and supporters are a huge part of what make a rivalry, and what make this rivalry so great. And then obviously the narratives and the media around it, and players buying into it, and players continuing the hype around the rivalry, coaches. And I would say this one has all of those.
100%. I think this is like the textbook rivalry in the NWSL, certainly right now. But for people who are listening who might not be aware, for people who started joining the NWSL in sort of recent years and may not know about the lore between the Portland Thorns and Seattle Reign, Susie, what can you tell us about how this rivalry got started, the Cascadia rivalry?
Yeah, so the Reign and the Thorns are both original NWSL teams and sort of came into the NWSL already having this Portland-Seattle rivalry on the MLS side. And there is a lot of hatred between Timbers and Sounders fans. So it just inherently had that going for it when the league started. And then we had truly historic players on both sides of the rivalry from the beginning. Christine Sinclair on the Portland side, Megan Rapinoe, Jess Fishlock on the Reign side as part of the original club players. So it did not take either of those teams and those players long to kind of organically develop that hatred. The Thorns were stronger in the beginning, in the first year in 2013 from a performance perspective, but then the Reign turned it around really quickly. And the thing that's so awesome about this rivalry, even 13 or 12 years later, is the teams are completely even in terms of results. So they're 16, 16, and 10 against each other, win, loss, draw.
Wow.
So this is a tight rivalry.
I love the record of this because also every time one team goes one game ahead, they're so quick to share it of just oh, we're up in the Cascadia Rivalry. We got the edge. And so I want to talk to you about maybe this past, decade plus of this rivalry, because yes, it did start as a proximity thing, as an MLS, even, pre-MLS rivalry of just these are two teams that have always just kind of hated each other. But what do you think was about this rivalry that the players actually really did latch onto? Because it now feels I think about Portland Thorns fans chanting "Gut the fish" or, build a bonfire, right? There are real things that have developed out of this rivalry. But what do you think swapped it from something that wasn't necessarily NWSL specific to something that now feels like the NWSL rivalry?
Yeah, I mentioned both players and coaches, and Laura Harvey and Jess Fishlock and Megan Rapinoe on the Reign side being with the club from the beginning. The Reign, like I mentioned, weren't very good in 2013, but Laura Harvey comes from England, where rivalries and derbies are like just such a core part of the football culture, that she was very quick and easy to bring that into the NWSL. So she was like bought in, I think, from the beginning. But even when the Reign in 2013 were not having super great results on the field, they went down to Portland in April of that year, and Jess Fishlock scored in Portland and pointed to her crest and started celebrating as if it was like the World Cup, you know? So I just think that like set the tone. And then Megan Rapinoe has been one of the most dominant players in this rivalry and has certainly bought into it. There was a game, gosh, I think it was 2017, when she picked off Emily Sonnet and scored and then screamed in her face while she was celebrating.
Oh my God.
So I don't,
Yes.
I think that like the original players, the original coaching staff are what have created such an amazing rivalry and atmosphere. And then the supporters follow that, obviously.
Totally. I mean, it certainly helps not only to have star players featuring on both teams in ways that have felt like pretty balanced, but I mean, I'm just thinking about the magnitude of the personalities of players like Megan Rapinoe, Jess Fishlock, even on the Thorn side, Megan Klingenberg, I think we have to give her a mention too. These are players who, I mean, I feel like demure is not even in their dictionary. You know, they are so the opposite of that. They want the smoke. They are all about the trash talk. They're petty. Like, these are the things I think that give a lot of texture to rivalries. But Susie, you also mentioned fans and supporters groups. These are also two teams with really diehard and dedicated supporters groups. So what role, in addition to, you know, the sort of like chants and phrases that Meg mentioned, what role have they played not only in sort of starting this rivalry, but keeping it going over the years?
Yeah, I think besides playing at home, the Reign players' favorite place to play is in Portland because, I mean, Portland supporters create such an amazing atmosphere. The Riveters have been, from the beginning, just like setting the standard for support for women's soccer. And the Reign are, I feel like, slowly following that and building their own culture when it comes to fans and supporter engagement. I think we're following in their footsteps on the Seattle side, to be honest, because, you know, the Reign have danced between homes, tried to find a home. Now they have a home at Lumen Field, and they're starting to really build that kind of rivalry culture and how the fans get involved. I would just say, yeah, the Riveters and Providence Park make such an amazing atmosphere for games, and it's only going to be louder. I know at the beginning of every second half, they start yelling "dodgy keeper" at the opponent's keeper. So, and I think that folks just feed into that, and it creates an amazing atmosphere.
I want to talk to you, you know, you mentioned bad blood early on, and I think, again, this is one of those that really does have some bad blood. But what do you feel like the rivalry has changed now? I mean, like, Jess Fishlock's still around, obviously, for the Reign. Laura Harvey, still very much the coach, I'm sure, is still bringing that energy. Lou Barnes, the other less original. But since we've kind of had this wave of retirements and players moving on from both of these teams, do you think it still has quite the same fire, or will it change? You know, like, once Jess Fishlock hangs up the boots, does that take this rivalry to a different place?
Yeah, it's a great question. My gut says no, but it could change slightly. I mean, not last year, but 2 years ago, Morgan Weaver scored against the Reign, and she grew up in Washington State, and she did the same kind of celebration, pointing at her crest. So I think the younger players are very eager to take on that responsibility of getting the team amped for a rivalry game, and they know how much it matters. And I know some of the originals have really like set that tone in training, set that tone in pregame hype conversation. So my gut says that while it could change slightly, that rivalry is not going anywhere.
That's music to my ears because it is just so entertaining, like automatic circling on the calendar whenever these two teams play. But Susie, as the league continues to grow and expand, more teams are added, of course. You know, just even further down the West Coast, there's sort of an emerging rivalry. Some might disagree with that, between Angel City and San Diego Wave. So I'm curious, Do you think that rivalries can be created at this stage in the league? And if so, what are some of the components for something more recent that, doesn't have the roots and the history that Cascadia Rivalry has?
I think players make such a big impact. So when you get those personalities, but I also think like Kansas City was the Reign's second rivals to Portland for so many years because of how many times they beat the Reign in the championship game and that Vlatko Laura tension back in the day. So I think results can be the thing that makes a rivalry most exciting and makes it happen. So if it's really unbalanced, if one side's winning a lot, then it's a little bit harder to make a rivalry sometimes. But having some sort of shared common enemy on a supporter side is a great recipe for a rivalry to start.
All right, Susie, before we let you out of here, I mean, you've been to a lot of these games. I know you've already mentioned Megan Rapinoe stealing the ball off Emily's on it, screaming in her face. But is there any other memory of being at one of these games that like really stands out to you over the years of like, yeah, when we're thinking about NWSL rivalry, that's the level, the energy that everybody should be looking at and being like, okay, how do we get there?
It's such a small example, but actually what sticks in my mind is I think the Reign played the Thorns in a preseason tournament 4 years ago or so, and Ali Watt was coming back from her ACL injury and was preparing for the preseason, and she took some players out in the preseason game and got the crowd so riled up. And it's like, it does not matter if it's a friendly, if it's a preseason game. Ali Watt understood her assignment. And I don't know. That one just stands out. It's very much different than a results or a perspective. But to me, like, I go to that moment when I think of rivalry moment because it was just so emblematic of how much these two teams both, A, I would say respect each other. That also is a core part of the rivalry. But B, hate each other too at the same time.
Thin line between love and hate, like they say. And I think that Ali Watt example also speaks to what you mentioned earlier, Susie, about what it means to sort of pass this history and this legacy down to younger players so that they, as you mentioned, understand the assignment and act accordingly on the field, apparently. These insights are so helpful. As we have spoken about, the nature and definition of a rivalry in this league is ever-changing. There's no one clear-cut answer, but the insight that you've provided, having covered this league and been involved in it for so long, Susie, is so valuable. So thank you so much for joining us and enjoy the game this weekend.
Thank you so much.
All right. Let's now turn our attention to the East and what the NWSL is calling uncreatively, I'm sorry to say, the East Coast Rivalry. Gotham taking it a little step further, calling it District versus Empire. We're talking about Gotham FC and the Washington Spirit. And we cannot have this conversation without our storied reporters and pals of the pod and off the pod, Jason Anderson and Jenna Tonelli. Jason Anderson is a USA Today pro soccer wire writer and has been covering DC soccer for super long. He is a historian on this beat. Jenna Tonelli contributes to Sports Illustrated. Jenna, Jason, thank you both so much for joining us for this important conversation. And how are you both doing? We'll start with you, Jason.
First, what an intro. I'm not sure I'm going to live up to it. Frazzled but good, which is, I guess, what our lives are like in this world, this space.
Jenna, how about you?
Good. I mean, I feel like I can't live up to like Jason's intro. You're like on this one, right, for Sports Illustrated. But no, I love you all. I'm so happy to be here and so happy to talk about District versus the Empire.
Giving Marvel energy.
What a name. What a name. I mean, I get how they got there, but I don't.
It's kind of pointed. It feels pointed to me. Kind of to the point of this conversation.
Yeah. All right. Let's maybe start with kind of the most basic question for you both. Jenna, I'll let you have first word here. But what makes an NWSL rivalry to you?
Definitely not the broadcasters talking about the rivalry every 2 seconds on the broadcast during the games. But I think that there are, I mean, obviously, the NWSL has had the Cascadia rivalry for many, many, many years. And it was a very organic rivalry that grew out truly from what went on the pitch. And of course there was like a geographic component to that. And I think, and I'm sure we'll get more into this with Jason, but I think Spirit Gotham is turning into a rivalry, getting, Spirit knocking them out of the semifinals and some, fun little, sonnet tiffing with Trinity and all that. And I think it is turning into a rivalry, but it's organic. Even though it seems a little bit forced in some of these instances, I think that there are true rivalries forming here in the NWSL.
All right, Jason, how about you? Would you agree?
Yeah, to Jenna's point, this is an American soccer thing, men's and women's, upper, top flight, lower level. We're always trying to force it. We're always trying to make history happen before it actually arrives. And Seattle and Portland had it's a carryover from so many other sports. These two cities don't necessarily, they have it in some sports and not in others. And I think these two fan bases are different enough that it's going to have to be organic. We're not going to get to jump off of a platform built by the Patrick division in the 80s and 90s of hockey, or anything like that. It's not going to be that. It's going to have to happen between these teams. And I think up until last year's playoff game, it was kind of forced. I think the playoff game, because it, in my opinion at least, probably the best game the league has ever had. At any point, I think that is what you need. That you need that kind of accelerant, and to it's appealing, of course, to want to talk it up. But I also kind of wonder where we're going to be next year with Boston coming in. Are we going to immediately be like, well, now Boston and New York, forget you guys, Spirit, go find someone else? Because I've seen other leagues do that. And it wouldn't shock me if that kind of popped up almost immediately. But I feel like, again, just let it happen. Like Jenna said, it's got to be organic.
Well, Boston apparently wants to smoke with Angel City, last we saw on their website, so that remains to be seen. But we also spoke with Susie Rantz about the Cascadia Rivalry, which I think, for all intents and purposes, is one of the platonic ideal sorts of rivalries in this league. But looking at Gotham and the Spirit, these are also two teams that have been competing in various iterations since 2013. They're not too far apart. They don't share the same sort of cultural similarities that I think you find in the Pacific Northwest that sort of lay the groundwork for a Cascadia rivalry. But Jenna, I'm curious, from your perspective, what is it that you think has sort of held this pairing back from taking off and turning it into something that is a little bit closer in feel and energy to what we see and get from a Cascadia rivalry?
I honestly just don't really know if there's anything inherently there to make it a rivalry other than what, Jason and I were saying about that semifinal, which I agree was definitely a very memorable game in the NWSL. So I don't think, like Jason was saying, DC and New York are not really there's some history of sports rivalries between the two, but it's Boston, it's Philly. I think about the Mets and how much they hate, the Phillies, or the Yankees and the Red Sox. The Boston New York thing is or Boston or New York Philly is just way more inherently ingrained into the culture. So I think I understand what the NWSL is trying to do here. Although I really got to talk to whoever came up with Empire, because first of all, what? The Empire? No. And also it's Empire State. And Gotham doesn't even play in New York State. And it's okay, so if it was New York City, maybe because, they're right there. It doesn't make sense to me. I'm the Empire Strikes Back? ? I don't understand what this is. And the district, I'm Hunger Games. So I don't know. We need to go back to the drawing board with that one. But I think that these rivalries inherently happen, and this one just isn't giving rivalry to me.
Jason, I want to jump in here. First of all, I will say district for DC is correct. That's fine. Yeah. Empire for Gotham is definitely questionable.
More of a stretch.
Jason, I want to talk to you because obviously, you've seen these players a lot. There are some OGs on the Washington Spirit in a way where Gotham has obviously had a pretty decent amount of turnover, and Gotham even as a thing is more recent in terms of I remember going to old Sky Blue Washington Spirit games, and I think Jason, you would agree they were frequently 0-0 snooze fests.
Do we want to talk about 2018?
Please, I want to hear about 2018.
We might, that's a whole episode, but I think the summary is these were the Spirit and Sky Blue in 2018 were having the two single worst NWSL seasons of all time, like statistically and just in terms of vibes.
Yes.
And
yes.
Yeah, it's a saga in and of itself. The players that survived it are like, oh, it was bad. But yeah, I was kind of thinking about that on the way here, just the parallels that where these teams have come from. But anyway, Meg, I think I cut you off.
Yeah. So just in terms of like where the players are at, like, yes, that semifinal happened. But, you know, when we talked to Susie about Cascadia, you had these big players on both sides who had been there from the jump. Christine Sinclair, that kind of type of player for Portland. Megan Rapinoe, like the ultimate petty queen, right, for Seattle. And like we're just not really seeing that here. So do you think that there is something to be found between the Spirit and Gotham from a player point of view, from a rivalry point of view? Is there enough there from that semifinal to maybe provide that accelerant, or is this still just something that we need more time to actually let it happen?
I think it's probably the latter. Some of that is like, you mentioned Rapinoe, and I was thinking of Jess Fishlock. Those are players born for rivalry games. They know that it's not just play soccer. There is a performance aspect to it. The players that have been around at the Spirit forever aren't really that personality type. Like Aubrey Kingsbury is not going to egg on fans at Gotham in a way that Rapinoe and Fishlock would find like, well, of course I would do that. It's like the most natural thing in the world. Kingsbury just passed Tori Huster for the all-time minutes played record at the Spirit, which she was like, oh, really? I didn't have any idea. And yet also wore an old Huster jersey to the game on Sunday. So maybe she knew on some level, like psychically she knew, but without knowing. But that's not her. I think the Spirit do have, like, I think Trinity Rodman would love to play it up in those big moments. But I think for her, like, every game is kind of the big moment in a way. And she and I don't think anyone really at the Spirit are super, it's more like Gotham's a very good team. We really respect the way they play. We have some links to them with Sonnet, with Lavelle. Midge Purse will come back to Maryland and train with a few Spirit players in the offseason when they're doing individual work. Like, there's a lot of links, but it's not the same. It doesn't have that same level of, like, a little bit of extra where players are like, I want to beat you. It's not like, I want 3 points. It's like, I want to beat you. And the 3 points are like an extra bonus. That isn't in place yet. And in fact, a couple of times when this has come up over the years, people ask Spirit players, like, who do you think your rival is? Usually some of the older players are like, back in the day, we kind of had it out for North Carolina. Because a lot of those players arrived when the Courage were at their absolute peak. And the Spirit, their last game at the much beloved Maryland Soccerplex was their first win over the Courage ever. And for a lot of those old players, that was a rivalry game to them. So yeah, I think it is going to take some time. I think it'll have to develop with maybe not this generation that's leading the Spirit, the veterans, but maybe the group that's coming up behind them. If both of these, the Spirit have had so many changes that it's like, if both these teams can keep the same faces, to the point about Sinclair and Rapinoe, you have to keep those players in place for long enough for them to develop some animosity. And that these teams have changed so much that, we're kind of starting from not square one, but like square 2 or 3.
That's such a good point about player longevity, too, because one of the things that we spoke about with Susie is how the energy and importance of these rivalries is getting passed down from those veteran players to younger ones so that they understand what is happening when they step on the field in these games. But I also want to talk about one more factor that's something we discuss a lot, especially in our meetings, doesn't always make it onto the show, but matters a lot to us, which is the bully factor. I'm talking about like trash talk. I'm talking about getting in players' faces. We definitely saw a lot of that in that playoff game between the Spirit and Gotham that I think sort of reinvigorated the possibility of this rivalry. I'm thinking specifically, actually, Jenna, of Esther and the way that she tends to celebrate goals in general. But there are some players, I think, on both sides who get that extra little something out of killing the dreams of their opponent's fans, so to speak. So I'm curious how you guys are sort of thinking about that and how, even going beyond this rivalry, how that sort of bully factor, the players who like to taunt, like to sort of like stir the pot in that way, can help if not turn a matchup into a rivalry, at least add a little bit more texture and spice to these NWSL games. Jenna, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's an excellent point. I mean, honestly, I think I even think back to when Christy Mewis was on Gotham, and she was a player that could really bully and kind of get the crowd going a little bit, and she was really good
Petty
at that.
Queen.
Yes. I mean, Gotham does it. Yes, extremely. Gotham did get Katie Stengel back, and I can kind of see her getting into that a little bit, especially as kind of like a returning player, maybe wanting to, like, you know, get another championship. You know, maybe Sonnet might be a little bit into it. And I did see Rose Lavelle was on Sam Ewis's podcast, and she was kind of getting into the idea of this spirit rivalry a little bit. You know, I think this is something that, like, the players do want because they recognize, like, it's good for the game and it's good for their competitiveness and it's good for the show. Some are better at, like, putting on that show than others. So I do think Gotham has a few of those. I think Spirit definitely has a few of those. I mean, Trinity is such a great example. She can really do that. So yeah, no, and even going back to talking about kind of like Rapinoe and Fishlock and all, those were the players that did make this a rivalry. So we do need those players on these teams if they want to really get into the rivalry. Until Boston comes along and says no barter.
I mean, like, before we let you go, I think one really quick point on this of just, I think there is this vibe within the NWSL of trying to, like, declare rivalries, right? Like, we saw it with Boston and trying to sell tickets, being like, we'll have rivalries against LA and New York, we promise, right? Like, those are natural rivalries for Boston to have, but it's not necessarily an NWSL specific thing. Can the two of you maybe just, if there's one rivalry moment, whether it's on the East Coast, West Coast, you know, we've talked about SoCal a little bit on this episode too. Like, to you, is there a moment that stands out in this league that makes it something specifically NWSL instead of something that's maybe carried over into this league? I'll let whoever comes up with an answer first go first.
I can actually, so the Trinity, you know, Bruninho red card Sonnet thing, that does stick out to me, actually. It really does, which is why I think District versus Empire is a growing rivalry. But actually something that was really interesting to me was at the NWSL final last year, Spirit versus Pride, is how obviously it was a very heavy Kansas City crowd because it was in Kansas City, and how against the Pride the Kansas City fans were because of the semifinal loss that Kansas City had to Pride. And so I think Kansas City Pride, in a way, is a way more organic rivalry than District Empire, because now they have that history. Like, Kansas City felt they should be there. So to me, that's the one that is kind of my forefront of my mind of recent memory.
Good shout. Jason, you got one?
Yeah, that's a great one. Especially, you get the feeling that those are fan bases that aren't planning, like, oh, let's tailgate together. Like Orlando and Kansas City, I don't think they're going to be like sharing a grill and chatting. Whereas, like, Cloud9 Spirit Squadron probably would. It would be completely like, yeah, let's hang out. It's fun. I'm thinking of, I gotta say, like, I brought up Jess Fishlock before, like, the expressions and the body language that she would bring to, I mean, she kind of brings them to every game. But to go to Portland specifically, she's like already at like a 9.5 on the dial, and she's like, can I break this dial, like go past 10 and just like snap the knob off? And that's kind of, it's like, I'm going to go in front of the Riveters and I'm going to let them have it. And they're going to scream at me, and that's what I want. I want them to be mad at me for the next 90 minutes. And I want them to be mad at me when we're on the way out or when the team bus is leaving. I'd like that for that to be what happens. Yeah, that is, it does kind of take, rivalries require a little bit of a wrestling heel, but there is a needle that can be threaded that I think she does a good job of, that does set opposing fans off, and so Seattle fans will love her forever. And I think Portland, top of the list, but there's probably a few fan bases who are like, I cannot stand her. And that is where rivalries come from, is like, this is the team I can't stand. It's not about getting ahead of them. It's about, I do not like them. I'm upset that they're even here. That's what we don't have in this rivalry, whatever it is. It's not there yet with Spirit and Gotham. They kind of get along in a weird way.
Totally agree.
I mean, in terms of moments that still live rent-free in my head, Marta in Kansas City, like, still. And I'm sure that's the case for both sides. Excellent insights, both of you. Jenna, Jason, thank you so much for joining us. We will, of course, be tuned in to this East Coast Derby working title. But we appreciate your thoughts as always, and enjoy the game this weekend. Meg, always such a treat to have our writer pals on the show, and especially with this kind of conversation, because as you mentioned, these are three very different rivalries. Of course, we got the Cascadia representation from Susie, the East Coast rivalry representation from Jenna and Jason. We, of course, still need to talk about the SoCal rivalry. But before we get there, what stood out the most to you from what we just heard?
Yeah, I mean, what I think everybody's picking at here is that there's an organic rivalry and then there's the marketing that starts to go around it, right? And this is, I think, getting back into some of the same bigger conversations we've been having all year around the NWSL, going back to, you know, does the NWSL understand what supporters want with the Unwell deal, right? Like, when marketing steps in, and that's not by default a bad thing. Like, you do need marketing in this league, and I think rivalries should be marketed because they are a natural stepping in point for new fans, especially like new fans coming in from a community who could just go like, yeah, sure, I hate Seattle. That sounds right to me. Yeah. Right? So yes, you need marketing, but then the question is, I think Jason really hit on this well too, of just like, these things are going to need time, and the NWSL actually does enjoy announcing history before like history has actually had enough time to happen. This league is still young in the grand scheme of things. Like, as someone from Massachusetts who grew up a Red Sox fan, like, yes, you hate the Yankees, like, you are born into that hatred, but that's because there have been decades of it, right? And so that to me is, I think, just where the most fruitful conversation is around what makes a rivalry in this league is that we're 12, 13 years into this, and there's still really only one legit one in my book.
Yeah, I mean, I do find it also interesting that these three rivalries that the league has sort of selected as their ones do have that geographic component to them.
Yes.
I do think that what works the best in Cascadia's favor is that it's not just that Seattle and Portland are close to each other. It's that there is an inherent rivalry, even going beyond soccer. I mean, like, whose coffee is best? Who has the best nature? Weekend hike potential, you know? You don't really, and I say this as a California native, though yes, Northern California, you don't really get that between LA and San Diego, because at the end of the day, I personally would be happy to hang out at either of your beaches. I personally would be happy to eat either of your Mexican food, you know? And I do think that those things matter, especially to WOSO folks, because we love our outdoors and we love our food to enjoy with games. And it's the same with the East Coast Derby. I mean, I feel like New York and DC aren't really, there's no inherent tension there. And again, I'm not just talking about soccer, I'm just talking culturally, even though all these pairs of cities are close to each other. The one thing that I will say about the SoCal Derby is there has been a good amount of like crunchy, literally on-field aggression, I think, between the two teams that is an important component, especially because unlike the other two rivalries, Angel City and San Diego have not met each other in a playoff with high stakes, with, you know, sweaty armpits, people just like fistfuls of popcorn from the nerves. Yeah. That also helps. And I think that's what Susie mentioned too, that one of the ideally primary components of a rivalry is performance. And you know, these are two new teams, so they need time. San Diego has, of course, made it to the playoffs, but they haven't met Angel City there. And I feel like until we get something like that, that's, for me, the next sort of step when it comes to the SoCal Derby becoming a thing.
Yeah, that's why I think Jenna bringing up the Kansas City, Orlando beef, right? Like, are they rivals yet? No, but they do, I think, hate each other at this point. So like, recipe ingredient number one has been formed, and I do think that moment of Marta, you know, like two undefeated teams coming together last year, Marta rocking the baby on that. I mean, like, the KC fans are gonna hate her forever for that one, right?
Yes.
And that
it takes a lot to hate Marta.
Like, and that's great. But like, Marta also, again, like we've been talking about, you need a heel, you need a villain, you need someone who can go into stadiums and provoke in and I don't want to say like in a bad way, in a great way, right? Like we need actual provocation, I think, of fans and players because it brings things to a new spicy level. But I go back to, you know, Marta's faced off against Rachel Daly with Houston, right? Like Houston Orlando had that kind of like quasi space race.
Yeah.
Like, you know, like, again, a little forced, but there was some real animosity, at least between a couple of the players. So it's not that surprising that it didn't really take off, no pun intended, because also performance historically was not there between those two teams. But Marta is a person who like knows how to walk into a stadium and own it in every fashion whatsoever. And so that is, I hope that the next generation of players coming up are kind of looking at some of the Rapinos, the Martas, you name it, and going like, okay, I gotta put that little cape on, and I gotta make some things happen, because it will fire up my team, it will fire up the opposing fans, and that's good. That's a good thing to happen.
It is. And I really do view this as a measurement of growth for the league. You know, we talk a lot about the pitfalls of, you know, toxic positivity when it comes to critiquing players, teams, performances, and games. And I think this, like we've said, you know, in our conversations earlier, respect is an important component to a rivalry. But I personally think that respect should not come at the cost of being too mindful and demure when it comes to being like the nasty athlete that everyone hopes that you're going to be, you know? It's okay to have a little bit of tension. It's okay to be spicy. And in fact, like, it's good. It's healthy. You need spice to have a good meal, you know? So yeah, that's my hope. It doesn't surprise me that so many of the names that we've mentioned, Marta, Rapinoe, Fishlock, Sonnet, are also, you know, relatively big name players, if not straight up superstars. I think that there's something probably about feeling empowered to show your full self in that way that hopefully will just continue to come as players continue to be more empowered, as they continue to earn more money. I think all of those things are connected. But Meg, as someone who has been also, along with our guests, with this league since its inception, I'm curious to hear from you. If you could revive a rivalry that maybe existed earlier in the league that has maybe gotten a little quiet, what would it be?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is, you know, Casey, I think, has kind of beef with everyone at this point. But I do, the old days of FC Kansas City and Seattle Reign, you know, those kind of like back-to-back Shield versus Championship, and the Vlatko Andonovski versus Laura Harvey of it all, it's kind of sitting there waiting to happen again. And
True.
So I would kind of like to see that come back. I would also like to see, you know, Portland obviously has its rivalry with Seattle. That is the standard. But Portland, North Carolina was also the other big performance-driven one for a number of years. I mean, that 2017 championship in Orlando was one of the gnarliest NWSL, like, everybody got hurt at that game, like, not in a great way either, but like, that was a rivalry championship game with Portland coming out on top. And that, to me, you know, Portland is good at finding beef with other teams, and so I think there are some historical ones that could make a comeback based on performance. But again, like, I do think the one that makes Cascadia stand out in so many ways is because it is so even, and that's, you never know who's going to win it day to day, and it really does not matter, like, whatever form is happening within that season, throw it out the window, because so everybody finds a different level in that rivalry game, and that again is another sign of a true rivalry.
That's such a good point, and good to note, because it is easy to sort of look at on paper. Seattle have been excellent. They've made some really exciting signings with Mia Fischel over the summer. She got her first minutes this past weekend in their win against Angel City, looked great. The team is definitely trending in the right direction. And then you look at the Thorns, who had that last minute heartbreaker at the hands, right foot specifically, of Trinity Rodman away. So it's easy to sort of make a prediction, you know, but to your point, rivalries and derbies are a completely different beast. So I think that's actually going to be a really, really good one, and probably the one that but you know, I'm actually going to be in San Diego for the SoCal Derby, so let me not say which one I'm most excited about. I think in terms of the football, all three are going to be really exciting, to be completely honest with you. But rivalries, like we said, are different. I think blood will be most likely shed in Cascadia.
You never
Theoretical
know.
blood.
You never. Okay, I would prefer theoretical
Yes.
to actual, but it has happened. It has happened. So, I just like, I really hope that time is given to develop a lot of these things in ways where, we don't. With Cascadia, yes, it was built upon the foundation of something pre-NWSL. But I really hope that teams coming into the league or teams that are more, recent to the NWSL can look at it and be like, okay, but we don't have to just go copy paste. I do think Boston has at least removed that language from the season ticket page.
They're learning in real time. I have to respect it.
And so I think there is this sense of you've got to earn a rivalry. You really have to earn it. And I am hopeful that we get a really good East Coast game and a really good SoCal game in addition to what we can all expect to, again, hopefully be a good game up in Cascadia.
Yeah, good things take time at the end of the day. But that's our show. We hope that you've enjoyed learning about rivalries as in all the different ways that they exist in this league. It should be a really fun weekend. So we appreciate you listening as always. In case you did not know, The Athletic has partnered with Yahoo Sports to deliver some of the very best coverage of women's sports, not just soccer. I encourage you to take a look at the Women's Sports Hub, which you can find at sports.yahoo.com/women-sports. The link to that is going to be in the bio as always. Not bio, show notes. I'm already getting ahead to social media. Make sure that you're giving us a follow, of course. I'm Tamerra Griffin. And what am I going to be doing on Instagram and Blue Sky? Probably.
Well, you're going to be in SoCal. Tacos.
Yes, tacos by the beach while writing, in case Emily's listening to this.
There you go. I'm Meg Linehan. I'm now, the Vermont grain season is done, so I'm going to have to find a new personality again, I guess.
Gosh.
But, still Vermont stuff, I suppose. But yeah, that's me.
Tournament come down is very real. And hey, you can always watch reruns of Marta's goal in the Copa America Femenina final.
Oh my God. Trying to watch that on my phone from that, like, there's a photo of me from Luke, this lovely photographer from Club 11, with the Copa America score up on my phone because we couldn't get the stream to load. So, real talk. What a goal.
We are a double screening and sometimes triple screening people, so I would expect nothing less. This show is not possible without our producer, Theo Lloyd Hughes, who is freshly back and probably still recovering himself from the Euros, our video producer, Leah Griffin, and our executive producer, Emily Olson. Thank you, as always, for listening. Enjoy the rivalries, and we'll see you soon.